The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of crystalline architecture, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed the emotional states of the assembled delegates. Today, those patterns flickered with unease, creating ripples of amber and crimson that spoke of fear barely contained. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire adjusted his breathing apparatus and studied the holographic display floating before the assembly. The data was impossible to ignore, yet equally impossible to believe. 17 star systems had gone dark in the past solar cycle. Not destroyed, simply silent. The pattern is unmistakable, announced High Curator Yasasandra, her serpentine form coiled around the central speaking platform. Her species, the Nithari, had maintained galactic records for over 50,000 years. When they expressed concern, the galaxy listened. Each system fell within a standard rotation of the last. The progression suggests intelligence, purpose. A chittering arose from the Karvek delegation, their insectoid voices creating a harmony of distress. Their translator crackled to life. The Outer Rim colonies report the same phenomenon. Ships arrive to find planets intact, but lifeless. No signs of bombardment, no radiation signatures, no biological contamination. The population simply vanished. Zethkar's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display. His people, the Vorthak, were warriors by nature, bred for conflict across a dozen generations. They understood warfare in all its forms: orbital bombardment, biological weapons, psionic assault, dimensional rifts. This was none of those things. This was something else entirely. "Has anyone considered," he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of a military commander who had survived campaigns across 3 galactic quadrants, "that we might be dealing with the return of an extinct species?" The chamber fell silent. Even the bioluminescent walls dimmed to deep purple, the color of profound unease. Elder Korth of the Melody Collective, whose people were among the oldest in the galaxy, slowly turned his massive head toward Zethkar. "You speak of legends, Ambassador. Myths told to frighten younglings. Do I?" Zethkar activated his personal holoprojector, displaying ancient star charts overlaid with the current disappearance pattern. "Look at the trajectory. Look at the timing. These aren't random attacks. Someone, or something, is following the old trade routes. The ones that were abandoned 12,000 years ago." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Those trade routes were forbidden territory now, marked in every galactic database as areas where ships simply didn't return. Most species had their own explanations: gravitational anomalies, dark matter storms, predatory space fauna. But a few, the very oldest civilizations, whispered different stories. "The Soul Route," whispered Curator Yasasandra, and her words carried the weight of ancient fear. "You're suggesting they're following the Soul Route?" The chamber erupted. Delegates from 100 worlds began speaking at once, their translation systems creating a cacophony of denial, disbelief, and terror. But Zethkar noticed that the eldest representatives, those whose species remembered the old wars, remained silent. High Admiral Nexus of the Hegemony Defense Fleet, a being whose cybernetic enhancements had replaced most of his original biology over his 800-year career, stood slowly. His mechanical voice cut through the chaos. "The Soul Route has been dead space for 12 millennia. Even our most advanced ships refuse to enter those sectors. The AI navigation systems classify it as a critical hazard zone." "Because of what happened there," Zethkar said quietly, but his words carried clearly in the suddenly silent chamber. "Because of what we did there." Elder Korth's expression grew grave. "The humans have been extinct for over 12,000 years, Ambassador. We made certain of that, did we?" Zethkar brought up another display, this one showing energy signatures from the disappeared systems. "Because these readings, they match nothing in our current databases. But they do match something in the restricted archives. Something from the Human Galactic War." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the chamber's bioluminescent displays went dark, as if the building itself refused to acknowledge what was being suggested. The Human Galactic War. The conflict that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. A war that had ended only when the combined might of 47 species had finally cornered humanity in their home system and rendered their worlds uninhabitable. A war that had become the greatest shame of galactic history, spoken of only in whispers and classified documents. Humans had been different from every other species the galaxy had ever encountered. While others had evolved along predictable paths, enhanced intellect, psionic abilities, technological integration, biological adaptation, humans had evolved something else entirely. Something that had no name in any galactic language, but could only be described as pure, unyielding will. They fought with such fury. Elder Korth said softly, his ancient voice carrying memories of battles fought in his youth. Even when outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Even when their ships were falling apart around them. Even when their worlds burned. They never stopped fighting. High Admiral Nexus accessed his memory banks, pulling up files that had been sealed for millennia. The final battle at Sol. We lost 60% of our combined fleet. Against a species that had been reduced to a single star system. Their ships were inferior, their weapons outdated, their numbers insignificant. But they kept fighting. They had something we couldn't understand, added another elder. A crystalline being whose species communicated through harmonic resonance. When we analyzed their combat patterns, there was no logic to them. They would sacrifice entire fleets to save single ships. They would abandon strategic positions to rescue stranded crews. They fought like every battle was personal. Zethkar studied the data again, his military mind working through the implications. The official records state that Sol was sterilized. Complete biological elimination. But what if some of them escaped? Impossible. High Admiral Nexus replied immediately. The fleet maintained a complete blockade. No ship left that system. No ship that we detected, Zethkar corrected. But humans were innovative. They modified their vessels in ways we'd never seen. Turned cargo ships into weapons. Turned weapons into ships. They had this concept they called jury rigging, making functional equipment from damaged components. Curator Ysesendra accessed the historical archives, her serpentine form writhing with agitation as she processed the data. There are gaps in the records. Anomalous readings during the final assault. Energy signatures that our analysts couldn't explain. What kind of signatures? Zethkar leaned forward. Gravitational distortions. Spatial rifts. As if. She paused, clearly struggling with the implications. As if they were trying to tear holes in space itself. The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy with dread. Several species were known to have developed faster than light travel through various means. Hyperspace jumps, dimensional folding, quantum tunneling. But deliberately ripping holes in the fabric of space-time was considered impossibly dangerous, if not actively insane. That would be consistent with human behavior, Elder Korth admitted reluctantly. They had no regard for conventional limitations. If they believed they could escape through such means. High Admiral Nexus was running calculations through his enhanced processors. The energy requirements would be enormous. The probability of survival would be minimal. Any species attempting such a method would be risking complete molecular dissolution. Unless they didn't care about the risk, Zethkar said grimly. Unless survival was more important than safety. A new voice spoke from the shadows of the upper galleries. Ambassador Krill of the Shadow Syndicate, a species that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions beyond standard perception. Their words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. We have felt disturbances. In the deep spaces between realities. Echoes of something that should not exist. Something angry. The implications hit the assembly like a gravitational wave. If humans had somehow survived their apparent extinction, if they had spent 12,000 years in the void between dimensions, if they had returned. We need to consider the possibility, Zethkar said carefully, that the disappearing colonies are not being attacked. They're being evacuated. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos was different. This time it was the chaos of growing panic. Evacuated by whom? Demanded High Admiral Nexus. And to where? Zethkar pulled up the most recent reports from the disappeared systems. Look at the details. No signs of struggle. No debris fields. No distress signals. Entire populations just gone. Their ships missing from orbital docks. Their planetary defense systems offline, but undamaged. You're suggesting, Elder Korth said slowly, that humans are collecting our people. I'm suggesting, Zethkar replied, that humans might be giving our people a choice we're not aware of. And our people are choosing to leave. The silence that followed was deafening. The idea that citizens of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations would willingly abandon their worlds to follow humans, humans who should have been extinct, was almost incomprehensible. But it would explain everything. The lack of violence, the missing ships, the complete absence of any trace left behind. Curator YSS Andra was accessing deeper archives, files that had been sealed since the end of the war. There are records, classified testimonies from prisoners of war, humans who were captured during the conflict. What did they say? Zethkar asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. They spoke of something they called the long road home. They claimed that defeat was temporary, that humans would find a way to return, no matter how long it took, no matter what they had to endure. Her voice became a whisper. They said that humans never truly surrender. They only wait. The holographic display updated with new data streaming in from the Galactic Sensor Network. Another system had gone dark. This one was closer to the core worlds. Much closer. High Admiral Nexus stood abruptly, his mechanical limbs whirring as he prepared to leave. I need to alert the defense fleet. If humans are somehow returning, we need to prepare for what? Ambassador Krill's voice cut through the air like a blade. For another war? Another attempt at genocide? Because that worked so well the first time. The Admiral paused, his optical sensors focusing on the shadowy figure. They were the aggressors. They refused every attempt at peaceful contact. They attacked our ships without provocation. Did they? Krill's form seemed to shift, becoming more solid. Or did we simply fail to understand their methods of communication? Did we assume that because they didn't follow our protocols, they were hostile? Zethkar felt a chill run through his respiratory system. He'd studied the war archives extensively. The official records painted humans as violent expansionists who had rejected all diplomatic overtures. But there had always been inconsistencies. The first contact protocols, he said suddenly. Where are the original records? Curator YSS Indra hesitated. They're classified, sealed by order of the War Council. Unseal them. I don't have the authority. Then, find someone who does. Zethkar's voice carried the full weight of his military rank. Because if we're about to face the return of a species we tried to exterminate, I want to know exactly what happened during that first contact. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. This time it carried the weight of 12,000 years of buried guilt. As if summoned by their conversation, the central communication array activated. A signal was coming through, a transmission from the edge of known space, where the soul route began. The message was simple, broadcast on all frequencies, in every galactic language. We remember. We survived. We're coming home. The transmission cut off, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Then, the sensor alarms began to sound. Something massive was moving through the void, following the old trade routes toward the galactic core. Something that registered on gravitational sensors, but remained invisible to optical arrays. Something that bent space around itself like a wound in reality. Elder Korth's ancient voice broke the silence. 12,000 years of exile. 12,000 years to grow angry. To plan. To prepare. On the holographic display, system after system began to flicker and go dark, creating a line of darkness that pointed directly toward the heart of galactic civilization. What have we done? Whispered High Admiral Nexus. But Zethkar was already moving, his military instincts taking over. Whatever was coming, whatever humanity had become during their exile in the void, the galaxy would need to be ready. The legends were returning, and the void itself seemed to tremble at their approach. The classified archives of the Galactic Council existed in a dimension slightly removed from normal space, accessible only through quantum tunneling and protected by security systems that had never been breached in their 12,000 years of existence. Zethkar stood before the access portal, his authorization codes finally approved after 3 days of bureaucratic warfare. Beside him, Curator YSS Andra coiled nervously around her portable data interface. These records were sealed for good reason, Ambassador. Some knowledge is too dangerous to revisit. More dangerous than whatever's coming for us. Zethkar activated his personal shield generator and stepped into the swirling portal. Reality bent around him as he transitioned between dimensions, and then he was standing in a chamber that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. The archives appeared as floating crystalline structures, each one containing compressed data streams that held the memories of entire civilizations. At the center of the vast space, marked with warning symbols in every known language, stood a single black crystal. The first contact records, YSS Indra whispered. Everything about humanity's entry into galactic space. Zethkar approached the crystal with the reverence due to a weapon of mass destruction. The moment his hand touched the surface, information flooded directly into his neural pathways, bypassing his normal cognitive processes and writing itself directly onto his memory. The first images were of a small blue-green world orbiting a yellow star at the edge of galactic civilization. Earth, they called it. Third planet from their sun, which they named Sol after one of their ancient languages. The initial survey teams had classified it as a developing world, pre-faster-than-light travel, primitive nuclear technology, multiple competing political entities. Standard protocol for such worlds was observation and gradual integration once they achieved interstellar capability. The Galactic Council had been doing this for 50,000 years. They had the process refined to perfection. But then, the humans had done something no species in galactic history had ever attempted. They launched themselves, Zethkar breathed, watching the archived data unfold. Without faster-than-light capability, without gravitational manipulation, they just threw themselves into space on chemical rockets and never looked back. YSS Andra slithered closer to share the data stream. The survey teams recorded ships leaving the Sol system using only sublight propulsion. Journey times to the nearest habitable systems would have taken centuries. Multiple generations would live and die aboard those vessels. The archived records showed fleets of massive ships, crewed by galactic standards but functional, carrying hundreds of thousands of humans into the void. They had converted asteroids into generation ships, built rotating habitats that could sustain entire populations, and launched themselves toward the stars with nothing but determination and primitive technology. They called it the Great Diaspora, Zethkar read from the cultural analysis files. They knew they might never see the destination themselves. They built these ships for their children's children's children. More data flowed through the crystal. The first direct contact had come when a human generation ship arrived at Kepler 442b, a world already inhabited by the Melody Collective. The humans had spent 4 centuries traveling to reach it, and arrived to find a thriving galactic civilization. Look at the contact protocols. YSS Indra pointed to a section of the data. The Melody tried to follow standard procedures. Establish communication, assess technology level, begin integration process. But the humans had responded in ways the galaxy had never seen. Instead of being overawed by superior galactic technology, they had immediately begun trying to understand it. Not to worship it or trade for it, but to tear it apart and learn how it worked. They reverse-engineered a Melody communication device in 3 standard days, Zethkar marveled. The Melody had spent centuries developing that technology. And then they improved it, YSS Indra added, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. Made it more efficient, smaller, more powerful. The records showed human engineers working alongside confused Melody scientists, human hands covered in alien machinery, human minds dissecting technologies that had taken millennia to develop. Within a solar cycle, the humans had not only mastered Melody science, but had begun innovating beyond it. The cultural analysis report, Zethkar accessed another data stream. What did the xenobiologists conclude? The report was extensive, compiled by the galaxy's greatest experts in alien psychology. But, reading it now, Zethkar could see that they had completely misunderstood what they were dealing with. Subject species demonstrates extreme adaptability and rapid technological integration. However, they show disturbing tendencies toward unrestricted innovation and disregard for established safety protocols. Humans appear to view technology not as tools with specific functions, but as puzzles to be solved and limitations to be overcome. They saw it as a warning, YSS Indra observed, not as the incredible gift it actually was. Zethkar continued reading. Humans have introduced 17 new technological innovations in the past cycle, including improvements to our faster-than-light communication systems and modifications to gravitational manipulation devices that increase efficiency by 34%. However, they refused to submit these innovations for proper testing and certification through galactic regulatory bodies. Because humans don't wait for permission, Zethkar said grimly. They see a problem, they solve it. They see an opportunity, they take it. The records showed the growing tension between human colonies and the established galactic order. Humans had spread to 12 systems within a century of first contact, their population growing exponentially through advanced medical technology they had developed by combining their own knowledge with galactic science. But, more concerning to the galactic authorities, humans had begun modifying the worlds they settled. Not terraforming in the traditional sense, but actively improving on planetary ecosystems, creating hybrid environments that supported both native life and human habitation. They were making the galaxy better, Zethkar realized. Everywhere they went, they left things improved. The Galactic Council saw it as contamination, YSS Indra replied bitterly. Unauthorized modification of natural systems. Disruption of established ecosystems. The archive data showed increasingly heated debates in the council chambers. Human representatives, when they bothered to attend council sessions, argued that improvement and progress were natural rights. Council members argued that stability and order were more important than innovation. Here, YSS Indra highlighted a specific conversation. Ambassador Sarah Chun arguing with the council about human expansion policies. Zethkar watched the holographic playback of a human female standing before the assembled galaxy's leadership. She was small by galactic standards, barely coming up to the speaking platform, but her voice carried absolute conviction. You've been maintaining the status quo for 50,000 years, Chun was saying. 50,000 years of the same technologies, the same methods, the same limitations. You've achieved stability at the cost of progress. We're offering to share everything we learn, everything we discover, everything we create. All we ask is the freedom to keep creating. The Council's response was a wall of bureaucratic language about proper procedures and established protocols. The humans, they said, needed to submit their innovations for proper review, which could take centuries. They needed to limit their population growth to sustainable levels. They needed to stop modifying alien ecosystems without permission. We're not asking for permission, Chun had replied. We're asking for cooperation. There's a difference. And that, Zethkar realized, was where it had all gone wrong. The galaxy had built its civilization on consensus and committee. Every decision was debated, analyzed, and reviewed by dozens of species before implementation. It was slow, but it was stable. It prevented conflicts between radically different societies. Humans operated on individual initiative and immediate action. They saw an opportunity and seized it. They encountered a problem and solved it. They didn't wait for meetings or committees or proper authorization. The Hegemony War. Zethkar accessed the next section of archives. The supposed human aggression that started everything. The records showed human ships arriving at Rigel 7, a contested system where the Hegemony Defense Fleet was engaged in a territorial dispute with the Karvek swarm. The humans had not been invited. They had no official business there. According to galactic law, they should have withdrawn immediately. Instead, they had analyzed the situation, determined that the Karvek were defending their legitimate territorial claims, and had proceeded to disable the Hegemony ships using weapons and tactics no one had ever seen before. They didn't destroy the Hegemony fleet, YSS Indra noted. They just stopped it, disabled their weapons, knocked out their engines, left the crews unharmed. Then, they opened a communication channel to both sides. Zethkar continued reading, and mediated a territorial agreement that satisfied both parties in less than 6 hours. The galaxy had been outraged. Humans had intervened in a sovereign dispute without authorization. They had used military force against a member species of the Galactic Council. They had imposed a solution without following proper diplomatic channels. The humans' response had been simple. The fighting was going to result in the destruction of several inhabited worlds, so they had stopped it. They had saved millions of lives and resolved a conflict that had been dragging on for decades. They couldn't understand why anyone would be angry about that. The Declaration of Human Aggression. Zethkar found the document he'd been looking for. The official justification for the war that followed. Reading it now, With the full context of what had actually happened, it was clearly a fabrication. Humans demonstrate a pattern of unprovoked military intervention, technological contamination of established systems, and disregard for galactic sovereignty, the document stated. Their rapid expansion and unlimited innovation pose an existential threat to galactic stability. An existential threat to galactic stagnation, YSS Andra corrected. They were showing everyone what was possible. What could be achieved if we stopped hiding behind bureaucracy and started actually solving problems? The war records were harder to access, protected by additional security protocols. But when Zethkar finally broke through, what he found was even more disturbing than he'd expected. The humans had not started the war. But once it began, they had fought it with a dedication and fury that had terrified the galaxy. Not because they were bloodthirsty or violent, but because they had recognized what the galaxy was trying to do to them. Extinction Protocol, Zethkar read from a classified hegemony military directive. Complete elimination of human genetic material from the galaxy. No survivors. No prisoners. No negotiation. The galaxy had decided that humanity's approach to existence was too dangerous to be allowed to continue. They had chosen genocide as the solution to the problem of human innovation. And the humans had realized it. Look at the human battle reports. YSS Andra had found additional files. Their tactical analysis of galactic military doctrine. Zethkar accessed the data and felt his blood chill. The humans had analyzed every battle, every engagement, every strategic decision made by the galactic forces. And they had reached a conclusion that chilled him to his core. The enemy has committed to total genocide, read a human military assessment. They are not trying to defeat us. They are trying to erase us. This is not a war of conquest or politics. This is a war of survival. And that, Zethkar now understood, had changed everything. Humans fighting for territory or resources were one thing. Humans fighting for their very existence were something else entirely. They had fought not just to win, but to ensure that their species would somehow, somewhere, survive. The Sol System battle. Zethkar found the final records. What really happened in the end? The data showed the combined galactic fleet surrounding the Sol System, every human world under bombardment, human ships falling one by one. A military victory that should have been absolute. But the humans had not surrendered. Even as their homeworld burned, even as their fleets were destroyed, they had continued working on something in the depths of space near their solar system's edge. Project Exodus. YSS Indra read from a human transmission that had been intercepted during the battle. We will not go gently into that good night. The final engagement showed human ships, massive vessels unlike anything they had built before, emerging from behind the outer planets. Ships that seemed to bend space around themselves, that moved in ways that violated known physics. They did it, Zethkar breathed. They actually tore holes in reality itself. The human vessels had vanished into rifts in space-time, dimensional tiers that had sealed themselves immediately after passage. The galactic fleet had been left behind, convinced they had witnessed the destruction of the remaining human forces. But the gravitational sensors had recorded something else, something that had been classified and buried for 12,000 years. They survived the transition, YSS Indra whispered. All of them. The energy signatures show successful dimensional translation. Zethkar stared at the data, understanding finally, dawning. They didn't escape to another star system. They escaped to another reality. Somewhere outside our dimensional framework entirely. And now they're coming back. The archive crystal pulsed with a final data stream. A message that had been buried in the deepest layers of security. A transmission that had been detected by long-range sensors just before the dimensional rifts had closed. It was in English, one of the human languages, but the translation was clear. We will remember those who chose justice over fear. When we return, they will be our friends. The others, they will learn that humans do not forgive genocide. We will be back, and we will be different. Zethkar and YSS Indra stood in the infinite silence of the archives, the weight of 12,000 years of buried truth settling around them. The galaxy had tried to destroy humanity for the crime of being too innovative, too adaptable, too willing to change the status quo. Instead, they had driven humanity into the void between realities, where they had spent 12 millennia growing stranger, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous. And now they were coming home. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the deepest secure chambers beneath the capital world of Nexus Prime, surrounded by defensive systems that could withstand the destruction of the planet itself. Representatives from every major species sat in perfect silence as Ambassador Zethkar presented the archived evidence of humanity's true history. The chamber's atmospheric processors struggled to maintain breathable conditions for dozens of different species, creating a barely controlled chaos of temperature, pressure, and chemical composition. But the chaos in the air was nothing compared to the chaos in the minds of those assembled. "You're telling us," High Admiral Nexus said slowly, his cybernetic voice processing the implications, "that we committed genocide against a species whose only crime was being better at innovation than us." Zethkar stood before the holographic displays, showing 12,000 years of hidden truth. "Not just genocide. We drove them to develop technologies that shouldn't exist. We forced them to become something beyond our understanding." Elder Korth of the Melody Collective sat motionless, his ancient form barely breathing. "The humans we destroyed were already advancing beyond anything we had achieved in 50 millennia. If they've spent 12,000 years in dimensional exile, they're not the same species anymore," completed Ambassador Krill of the Shadow Syndicate. "They've had time to evolve, to adapt, to become something entirely new." The central communication array suddenly activated, causing security alerts to sound throughout the chamber. This should have been impossible. The emergency session was broadcast on sealed frequencies, protected by quantum encryption that had never been broken. "Galactic Council of Nexus Prime," a voice said in perfect, unaccented galactic standard. "This is Commander Sarah Chun, speaking for the human collective. We request permission to address the assembly." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah Chun had been dead for 12,000 years. Everyone in the chamber had seen her archived image arguing before the council in the decades before the war. "This is impossible," High Admiral Nexus stated. "You're accessing secure channels that are protected by quantum encryption based on mathematical principles we taught you in the first place." The voice interrupted calmly. "Admiral Nexus, serial designation HDF, 7749, Prime, cybernetic integration, level 94.7%. Psychological profile indicates extreme loyalty to command structure over individual judgment. We remember you." Nexus's optical sensors flared with alarm. That information was classified at the highest levels, stored in systems that were completely isolated from external networks. "Ambassador Zethkar of the Vordhak Empire," the voice continued, "military service record, distinguished, psychological evaluation, pragmatic but ethical, likelihood of supporting diplomatic solution, 67.3%. We remember you too." Zethkar felt his four hearts skip in sequence. The voice wasn't just accessing their current data, it was referencing psychological profiles that had been compiled during first contact, 12,000 years ago. Elder Korth, aged approximately 57,000 galactic standard years, witnessed our first arrival in this galaxy, argued against military intervention during the early diplomatic meetings. "We remember your kindness. How are you doing this?" Curator YSS Indra demanded, her serpentine form coiled in agitation. "Our systems are completely isolated." "Your systems," the voice said with what might have been amusement, "are based on technologies we showed you how to build. Did you think we wouldn't leave ourselves ways to access them?" The implications hit the chamber like a wave of terror. If humans had built back doors into galactic technology 12,000 years ago, if they had been watching and waiting all this time. "You've been spying on us," Admiral Nexus accused. "We've been learning from you," the voice corrected. "Watching how our innovations spread throughout the galaxy. Observing how our descendants adapted to exile. Studying how you've used the gifts we gave you." "Descendants?" Zethkar leaned forward. "What do you mean, descendants? Did you think humans died when you burned our worlds?" There was no anger in the voice, but something else, something that might have been pity. "Humans are adaptive, Ambassador. We survive. We spread. We endure." New data began appearing on the chamber's displays. Information that hadn't been there moments before. Population genetics. Bloodline analysis. Evolutionary tracking data. 17% of the current galactic population carries human genetic markers, the voice explained. Hybrid descendants from the early colonial period. They don't know it. The markers are recessive, hidden, dormant. But they're there. The chamber erupted. Delegates began demanding immediate genetic testing. Others shouted denials, and several species retreated into defensive postures that triggered automatic security protocols. "You're lying," Admiral Nexus declared, but his voice carried uncertainty. The Melody Collective, subsector 7G, population increase of 300% over the past 10 millennia, coinciding with increased innovation and problem-solving capabilities. The voice continued relentlessly. The Carvex swarm, engineering advancements that have accelerated their terraforming abilities beyond all previous projections. The Vordhak Empire, military tactics that emphasize individual initiative rather than traditional command structures. Zethkar's mind reeled. His own people's military philosophy had indeed changed over the millennia, becoming more flexible, more willing to adapt in the moment rather than follow rigid protocols. "We didn't contaminate your people," the voice said gently. "We enhanced them. Voluntary partnerships, willing unions, families that chose to bridge the gap between species. Our gifts to the galaxy weren't just technological. They were biological, social, cultural." "The disappearing colonies," Elder Korth said suddenly. "You're not attacking them. You're collecting them. We're reuniting with our lost family," the voice confirmed. "The hybrid descendants who carry our genetic legacy have always felt incomplete, disconnected. When we offer them the chance to rejoin the greater human collective, they accept." The displays showed new images, the missing colony worlds, now visible through sensor arrays that somehow bypassed all galactic detection systems. The worlds weren't empty. They were thriving. Populations that had vanished were building new cities, developing technologies that seemed to blend galactic science with something else entirely. "We're offering them a choice," the voice continued. "Stay with the civilization that tried to exterminate their ancestors, or join the civilization that remembers what they could become. And they're choosing you," Zethkar said grimly. "They're choosing possibility over stagnation, innovation over bureaucracy, progress over stability. The same arguments that had led to war 12,000 years ago. "We won't let you take our people," Admiral Nexus declared, his weapons systems beginning to charge. "Admiral," the voice said sadly, "you're not understanding. They're not your people. They're our people. They always have been. We're just taking them home." The communication array shifted, and suddenly, the chamber was filled with voices, thousands of them, speaking in dozens of languages. The missing colonists, broadcasting from their new worlds. "The humans showed us what we could build," one voice said. "Technologies that could terraform dead worlds in decades instead of millennia. They taught us how to enhance our own biology," said another. "Not replace it like the hegemony does, but improve it while keeping what makes us ourselves. We're still who we were," a third voice added. "But now we're who we could be." The broadcast continued, showing hybrid descendants working alongside beings that seemed human but weren't quite. Humans who had adapted to 12,000 years in dimensional exile, whose forms had been shaped by contact with realities beyond normal space-time. "We are still human," the original voice said. "But we are more than we were. We've learned to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We've mastered technologies that reshape reality itself. We've become what we always had the potential to be. What do you want from us?" Elder Korth asked, his ancient voice heavy with resignation. "The same thing we wanted 12,000 years ago," the voice replied. "To share what we've learned. To work together. To make the galaxy better than it is." "And if we refuse?" Admiral Nexus demanded. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the weight of 12 millennia of preparation, of technologies beyond galactic understanding, of beings who had survived extinction by becoming something unprecedented in universal history. "Admiral," the voice finally said, "you tried to exterminate us once. We survived. We adapted. We grew stronger. Do you really want to discover what 12,000 years of preparation have taught us about defending ourselves?" The chamber's displays suddenly showed something that made every being present freeze in terror. Space itself, in the regions where human vessels were operating, was wrong. Realities seemed to bend, and reflects around them like liquid. Stars appeared and disappeared. The laws of physics seemed to be suggestions rather than absolute rules. We don't want war, the voice continued. War is wasteful, destructive, limited. We've learned to achieve our goals through methods that transcend conflict entirely. What kind of methods? Zethkar asked, though he dreaded the answer. Watch. The displays shifted to show the Hegemony Defense Fleet, currently deployed at maximum alert across 17 sectors. As they watched, something impossible happened. The ships simply changed. Their weapons systems reconfigured themselves into mining equipment. Their military sensors became agricultural monitors. Their combat AI systems rewrote themselves into exploration and terraforming protocols. We're not conquering your fleets, the voice explained as panic erupted throughout the chamber. We're helping them discover what they really want to be. Admiral Nexus was frantically trying to contact his ships, but the communication channels were filled with confused reports from crews who suddenly found their vessels transformed into peaceful exploration vessels. The captains are requesting permission to begin scientific surveys of nearby systems, one transmission reported. The crew seems happy about the change. Morale has never been higher. We've learned to work with the deeper patterns of consciousness, the voice said. Every being in the galaxy has dreams, aspirations, hopes for what they could become. We simply help them realize those dreams. You're controlling minds, Curator YSS Andrew accused. We're freeing minds, the voice corrected. From the limitations imposed by fear, by bureaucracy, by the belief that things must always be as they've been. We're showing people what they could choose if they weren't afraid to choose it. The chamber's security systems suddenly powered down, not from external attack, but from internal decision. The AI systems that controlled station security had apparently decided that security was no longer necessary. This is what we've learned in our exile, the voice continued. That consciousness itself is malleable. That reality responds to will and intention more than to force. That the universe wants to be improved, but most beings are too afraid to try. You're terraforming consciousness, Zethkar said, understanding finally, dawning. We're gardening it, the voice confirmed, helping it grow into what it's always wanted to be. And we're very, very good at gardening. The displays showed more systems, more worlds, more ships joining the growing human collective, not through conquest or force, but through choice. Choices that beings were making when they finally understood what was possible. The galaxy you've built is stable, the voice said. But stability isn't life. Life is growth, change, adaptation, evolution. We're offering the galaxy the chance to live again. And if we prefer stability? Elder Korth asked. Then, you'll have it, the voice replied simply. In the preserve we're establishing for those who choose not to grow. A carefully maintained ecosystem where everything remains exactly as it is now. Forever. The threat was clear, though delivered with perfect courtesy. Join humanity's vision of progress, or be relegated to a cosmic nature preserve, protected but irrelevant. How long do we have to decide? Zethkar asked. You've already decided, the voice said gently. You decided 12,000 years ago when you chose fear over wonder. We're simply showing you the consequences of that choice. And now you get to choose again. But this time, you understand what the stakes really are. The communication array went silent, leaving the chamber in stunned quiet. Outside, through the transparent aluminum walls, they could see the stars themselves seeming to shift and change, reality bending around possibilities that had never existed before. Humanity had returned. But they hadn't returned as conquerors or victims. They had returned as gardeners, offering to help the galaxy grow into something it had never dared to imagine. The only question remaining was whether the galaxy was ready to grow. 3 standard days after the revelation in the council chambers, Zethkar stood on the observation deck of his personal cruiser, watching something that should have been impossible. The star system designated Kepler 442, the site of humanity's first contact with galactic civilization, was transforming itself. Not being transformed. Transforming itself. The gravitational readings make no sense, reported his science officer, a young Vorthak whose scales flickered with confusion. The star's output has increased by 300%, but the temperature hasn't changed. The planets are redistributing themselves into optimal orbital positions. And, sir, the asteroid belt appears to be assembling itself into artificial structures. Zethkar adjusted his breathing apparatus and tried to process what he was witnessing. Through the viewport, he could see massive geometric shapes forming from what had once been random space debris. But more disturbing than the impossible engineering was the beauty of it. The structures weren't just functional, they were art. They seemed to sing in harmonics that resonated through the ship's hull. Any response from the Melody Collective? He asked. That's the strange part, sir. The Melody aren't fleeing or fighting. They're participating. They're helping build whatever this is. A communication request appeared on his personal console. The source identifier simply read, Sarah Chun, Human Collective. The same impossible person who had addressed the council 3 days ago. Zethkar accepted the connection and found himself face-to-face with a being who looked human but clearly wasn't anymore. Her features were familiar from the archives, but her eyes held depths that seemed to extend into dimensions beyond normal perception. When she smiled, space itself seemed to warm around her. Ambassador, she said warmly, thank you for coming to witness this. I hoped you would. What are you doing to this system? Zethkar demanded. We're showing it what it could be, Chen replied. Every star system is a garden that's never been properly tended. Every planet is a canvas that's never been painted. Every asteroid is a tool that's never been used for its highest purpose. Through the viewport, Zethkar watched as one of the forming structures, a crystalline lattice the size of a moon, began to pulse with internal light. The light wasn't electromagnetic radiation as he understood it. It was something else, something that made his consciousness resonate like a struck bell. The Melody are voluntary participants, Chen continued, apparently reading his thoughts. They remember what it was like when humans first arrived here 12,000 years ago. The excitement of discovery, the joy of creation, the satisfaction of building something beautiful together. You're using some kind of mind control on them, Zethkar accused. I'm offering them the choice to be what they've always wanted to be, Chen corrected gently. The Melody have been composers for their entire evolutionary history. They create music from mathematical harmonics, art from pure mathematics. But they've been limited by their technology, by their fear of change, by the galaxy's insistence on stability over beauty. A new voice joined the conversation, melodic, harmonic, distinctly melody. Ambassador Zethkar, this is Elder Composer Kriseth. I wanted to speak with you directly. Zethkar knew that name. Kriseth was one of the most respected artists in galactic civilization, a melody whose musical compositions were studied across dozens of species. Elder Composer, Zethkar said carefully, are you in any distress? Are you being coerced? The harmonic laughter that filled the communication channel was unlike anything Zethkar had heard before, joyful, complex, alive in ways that transcended normal sound. Ambassador, I have spent my entire life trying to compose the song of perfect spheres, the mathematical harmony that could make reality itself sing. I have failed for 2,000 years because I was limited by what was possible with our technology. Through the viewport, the crystalline structures began to resonate in harmony. The sound was audible through the ship's hull, but more than that, it was felt. The very atoms of Zethkar's body began to vibrate in sympathy with rhythms he had never experienced. The humans have given me instruments that can play with gravity, with time, with the fundamental forces of reality itself, Kriseth continued. I am composing symphonies from star systems. I am writing music with planets as notes and solar winds as crescendos. For the first time in my existence, I am truly creating. This is what we offer, Chen said as the incredible music swelled around them. Not conquest, not subjugation. The chance to become what you've always dreamed of being, but never dared to imagine was possible. The ship's sensors detected new activity, other vessels approaching from across the galaxy. But they weren't military ships. They were artists, scientists, explorers, and dreamers from dozens of species, drawn by the impossible music emanating from the transformed system. They're coming voluntarily, Zethkar observed. They're coming home, Chen corrected, to the civilization that remembers how to dream. On the main display, a new transmission appeared. It was Admiral Nexus, broadcasting from his flagship at the edge of the system. But something was different about him. His cybernetic enhancements, which had replaced most of his organic components over 8 centuries, seemed somehow more integrated, more alive. Ambassador Zethkar, Nexus said, and his voice carried emotions that Zethkar had never heard from the cyborg admiral. I need to speak with you about what's happening to my fleet. Are you in distress? Zethkar asked. Do you require assistance? Nexus was quiet for a long moment. His optical sensors focused on something beyond the camera's range. For 800 years, I've been replacing parts of myself with machines, trying to become more efficient, more logical, more perfect. I told myself it was advancement. Admiral, the humans showed me what I was really doing, Nexus continued. I was trying to stop feeling, to stop being vulnerable, to stop being alive. My cybernetic systems weren't enhancing my humanity, they were replacing it. The camera angle shifted, showing Nexus's hands. The mechanical appendages that Zethkar had seen countless times were still there, but they moved with fluid grace, as if they had become truly part of him rather than merely attached to him. They didn't remove my enhancements, Nexus explained. They helped me integrate them properly, to make them serve life instead of replacing it. For the first time in centuries, I feel whole. Admiral, Zethkar said carefully, you're still loyal to the hegemony defense fleet, aren't you? I'm loyal to the highest ideals the defense fleet represents, Nexus replied. Protection of the innocent. Defense of those who cannot defend themselves. The preservation of life and civilization. He paused, looking directly into the camera. The humans aren't threatening any of those things. They're enhancing them. The communication channel expanded to include dozens of other fleet commanders. Each reported the same thing. Crews that were happier, more efficient, more creative than they had ever been. Ships that had been transformed from instruments of war into tools of exploration and construction. We're not conquering your military, Chen said gently. We're helping it remember what it was supposed to be protecting. Zethkar felt a strange sensation in his chest, his four hearts beginning to synchronize in a rhythm he had never experienced. What are you doing to me? Nothing, Chen replied. We're simply showing you what it feels like when fear stops drowning out hope. Through the viewport, Zethkar watched as more ships arrived. Not just military vessels, but research ships, colony transports, even civilian craft. Beings from across the galaxy were coming to witness what was happening in the Kepler 442 system. The Galactic Council is demanding an immediate cessation of activities, Zethkar reported. They're calling this an act of war. The Council has been voting on the same resolution for 3 days, Chun said with amusement. They can't reach a consensus because half their members are already here, participating in what we're building. It was true. Zethkar could see ships bearing the insignias of dozens of Council species scattered throughout the system. Their crews weren't fleeing or fighting. They were working alongside human vessels to construct something unprecedented. What are you building? Zethkar asked. A better galaxy, Chen replied simply. One where every species can reach its full potential without fear of judgment or restriction. Where innovation is celebrated rather than regulated. Where the only limit on what you can become is your own imagination. And those who choose not to participate. Chen's expression grew sad, but not angry. They'll be protected, preserved, kept safe in systems where everything remains exactly as it is now. They can have their stability, but they can't have it for everyone. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't planning to destroy the existing galactic order. They were planning to transcend it. To create a new civilization alongside the old one. And let beings choose which one they wanted to be part of. The preserved worlds, Zethkar said. They'll become irrelevant. They'll become museums, Chen corrected. Important for understanding where we came from. But not where we're going. A new alarm sounded throughout Zethkar's ship. His tactical officer reported massive energy readings from the direction of the galactic core. The Council's emergency response fleet was mobilizing. Thousands of ships, representing the combined military might of 47 species, moving toward the Kepler 442 system. They're coming to stop you, Zethkar warned. I know, Chen said sadly. They're making the same choice they made 12,000 years ago. Fear over wonder. Control over growth. Stagnation over evolution. Will you fight them? Chen considered the question seriously. We'll defend ourselves. But not in the way they expect. We've learned that force creates resistance, and resistance creates conflict. We've found better methods. What kind of methods? Watch. The approaching fleet suddenly appeared on all sensors. Over 10,000 vessels in perfect military formation, bristling with weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. At their head was the Council's newest super-dreadnought, a ship the size of a small moon carrying enough firepower to destroy everything in the Kepler 442 system. But, as Zethkar watched, something impossible happened. The fleet slowed, then stopped. Not because they had been attacked or disabled, but because they had chosen to stop. Communication channels opened across the entire fleet. Thousands of voices began speaking at once. Crew members asking questions, demanding explanations, challenging orders they had never questioned before. "Why are we here?" one voice asked. "What are we really fighting for?" "The humans haven't attacked anyone," another said. "They're building something beautiful. Why are we trying to destroy it?" "I joined the defense fleet to protect people," a third voice added. "How does destroying artists and explorers protect anyone?" Fleet Admiral Corvex of the Hegemony appeared on the main communication channel, his reptilian features twisted with rage. "All ships maintain formation. We are here to preserve galactic order against human contamination." "What contamination?" asked Captain Ural of the 3rd Squadron. "They're helping beings become better versions of themselves. They're destroying our way of life." Corvex snarled. "What if our way of life deserves to be destroyed?" The question came from Commander Sect of the Karvek Swarm, a species known for absolute loyalty to authority. "What if we've been wrong for 50,000 years?" The fleet hung in space, paralyzed by doubt and questions that had never been asked before. Weapons powered down not through sabotage, but through conscious choice. Crew members began refusing orders that they suddenly realized made no sense. "You see," Chen said quietly to Zethkar, "the greatest weapon against tyranny isn't force. It's helping people remember that they have choices." Within hours, the Great Fleet had dissolved. Some ships returned to their home systems to report what they had seen. Others joined the growing collection of vessels helping to build humanity's impossible structures. A few maintained formation and prepared to fight, but they found themselves increasingly alone. "The Council will send more fleets," Zethkar pointed out. "The Council is dissolving," Chen replied. "When beings realize they can choose their own destiny, they tend to stop accepting the authority of those who would choose for them." As if to confirm her words, Zethkar's communication array began receiving official dissolution notices from government after government throughout the galaxy. Not coups or revolutions, simply formal announcements that various species were withdrawing from galactic governance to pursue their own development. "You're not conquering the galaxy," Zethkar realized. "You're teaching it to conquer itself." "We're teaching it to be free," Chen corrected. "Freedom is the most contagious idea in the universe. Once beings truly understand what it means, they can't accept anything less." Through the viewport, the transformed Kepler 442 system pulsed with energies that painted space itself in colors that had no names. Ships from hundreds of species worked together to build structures that would have been considered impossible just days before. "What happens now?" Zethkar asked. "Now we grow," Chen said, her impossible eyes bright with possibility. "We explore. We create. We become everything we've ever dreamed of being. And we invite everyone in the galaxy to join us. And if they refuse, then they get exactly what they've always claimed they wanted," Chen replied. "Perfect, unchanging, eternal stability. Just not for everyone else." Zethkar looked out at the impossible beauty being born around him and felt his heart synchronize completely for the first time in his life. "Where do I sign up?" Sarachin smiled, and space itself seemed to rejoice. 1 year after the transformation began, Zethkar stood on what had once been the moon of Kepler 442c, now reshaped into a living crystal that sang with the harmonies of space itself. Through the transparent biological walls of his new dwelling, he could see the impossible vista that had become his daily reality. Stars danced in patterns that painted stories across the void. Planets had been gently moved into configurations that created gravitational symphonies spanning light years. The asteroid belt had become a vast garden where crystalline trees grew in zero gravity, their branches reaching across millions of kilometers to touch each other in an endless network of living mathematics. Still having trouble accepting it's real? The voice belonged to Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the humans who had emerged from dimensional exile. She looked human enough, but her presence seemed to extend beyond the normal 3 dimensions, and when she moved, reality bent slightly around her. I fought in 17 military campaigns, Zethkar replied, his 4 hands tracing patterns in the air that controlled the room's environmental systems, technology that responded to thought and intention rather than mechanical interface. I've seen the rise and fall of civilizations. I thought I understood what was possible. And now, Zethkar gestured toward the viewport where a group of young beings from various species were playing a game that involved juggling small suns between their hands. Now I'm not sure I understand anything. Dr. Vasquez smiled and settled into a chair that formed itself from the crystalline floor to accommodate her physique. That's usually the first sign that you're ready to really learn. Through their enhanced communication implants, not the crude cybernetics he had known before, but organic interfaces that had grown naturally from his own neural tissue, Zethkar could feel the presence of millions of beings throughout the transformed region of space, not as individual minds, but as a vast, collaborative consciousness that somehow enhanced rather than diminished personal identity. The reports from the preserved worlds, Zethkar said, pulling up data that appeared as shifting patterns of light in the air around them. They're not happy. The preserved worlds, the systems where beings could choose to maintain the old ways of galactic civilization, had become islands of rigid order in an ocean of impossible change. Those who had chosen safety over growth now found themselves watching from the sidelines as the rest of the galaxy evolved beyond their understanding. The Galactic Council has reconvened on Nexus Prime, Zethkar continued. They're calling it the final stand against human contamination. How many species? Dr. Vasquez asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. 14. Down from 47. Zethkar manipulated the data display, showing the political breakdown of the galaxy. Most of the others have dissolved their governments entirely. They're organizing into cooperative networks based on shared interests rather than species boundaries. It was true. The old model of species-based government had crumbled as beings discovered they had more in common with like-minded individuals from other worlds than with their own kind who chose different paths. Artists from a dozen species worked together in creative collectives that spanned star systems. Scientists formed research communities that transcended biological limitations. Engineers collaborated on projects that reshaped reality itself. The Hegemony Defense Fleet? Dr. Vasquez inquired. Disbanded 6 months ago. Most of the ships have been converted into exploration vessels or terraforming platforms. Admiral Nexus is leading a project to build living worlds in previously uninhabitable systems. Zethkar paused, accessing memories that still seemed impossible despite having lived them. He's teaching planets how to evolve themselves, showing worlds how to develop consciousness, and join the galactic community as equal partners rather than resources to be exploited. And the 14 holdout species. Zethkar's expression grew concerned. They're militarizing, pooling their resources to build weapons designed specifically to fight this. He gestured toward the impossible beauty surrounding them. Reality anchoring devices, consciousness suppression fields, dimensional barriers designed to prevent further contamination. Dr. Vasquez nodded sadly. We expected this. Fear makes beings do desperate things. They're planning something called the Purity Protocol, Zethkar continued. Complete sterilization of any system showing signs of human influence. They've developed weapons that can supposedly reset space-time to its original state. The communication network suddenly flooded with awareness as Sarah Chun joined their conversation. Her presence felt warm and vast, like standing near a star that somehow contained infinite gentleness. We know about the Purity Protocol, Chun said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had watched civilizations rise and fall across 12,000 years. They're planning to use it on the Sol system first, to purify our original home, and make a statement about their intentions. Zethkar felt a chill run through his improved nervous system. Can they actually do it? Reset space-time itself? Theoretically, yes, Dr. Vasquez replied. The physics are sound, if horrifically dangerous. They're basically planning to create controlled temporal reversions, forcing reality to forget that certain changes ever happened. The problem, Chen added, is that they don't understand what they're dealing with. Soul isn't just our birth world anymore. It's become something else entirely. Through the network, Zethkar suddenly had access to observational data from the Soul system. What he saw made his enhanced consciousness struggle to process the implications. Earth wasn't a planet anymore. It was a living entity the size of a solar system, its surface extending through multiple dimensions simultaneously. It pulsed with consciousness that spanned galaxies, and around it orbited not planets, but ideas given physical form. Concepts like hope, creativity, and endless possibilities spinning through space as tangible objects. You turned your homeworld into. Zethkar struggled for words. Into what Earth always wanted to become, Chen explained. A living library of every dream, every story, every possibility that consciousness can imagine. It exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously and serves as an anchor point for reality itself. If the preserved worlds try to use their purity protocol on Soul, Dr. Vasquez said grimly, they won't reset it to its original state. They'll create a paradox cascade that could unravel the entire local galactic cluster. Zethkar felt the weight of the situation settling around him. They don't know this. They've convinced themselves that we're a contamination that needs to be cleansed, Chen replied. They can't accept the possibility that we might be an evolution that needs to be embraced. Their fear has made them incapable of seeing the danger they're creating. So what do? We show them, Chen said simply. One last time, we offer them the choice to grow instead of destroying themselves trying to prevent growth in others. The communication network shifted, and suddenly, Zethkar found himself aware of a vast gathering taking place across multiple dimensions. Representatives from every species, every world, every individual who had chosen to embrace the human gift of limitless possibility were coming together for what might be the last diplomatic contact with the preserved worlds. Ambassador Zethkar, Chen said formally, would you be willing to carry our message to the final council meeting on Nexus Prime? Zethkar considered the request. Going back to the preserved worlds meant giving up the enhancements he had gained, the expanded consciousness, the ability to perceive beauty and possibility in 17 dimensions simultaneously. It meant making himself small again to fit into the rigid confines of the old galactic order. I'll need to limit my enhancements to pre-contact levels, he said. If I show up as I am now, they'll never listen. Are you willing to make that sacrifice? Zethkar looked out at the dancing stars, the singing planets, the impossible gardens growing between dimensions. He thought about beings throughout the galaxy who were discovering what they could become when fear stopped limiting their growth. And he thought about the 14 species huddled in their preserved worlds, so afraid of change that they were preparing to destroy reality itself rather than accept evolution. Yes, he said, someone needs to try. The transition back to his original form was more difficult than Zethkar had expected. After a year of expanded consciousness, being limited to single-dimensional perception felt like blindness. The loss of the communication network left him feeling isolated and alone in ways he had forgotten were possible. But as his ship approached Nexus Prime, he carried with him something more powerful than any enhancement. The absolute knowledge that beings could be more than they had ever imagined, and the unshakable conviction that choice was always possible, even in the darkest circumstances. The final council session was smaller and more desperate than anything Zethkar had witnessed before. Only the most hardline representatives remained, their minds closed to any possibility except the complete elimination of human influence from the galaxy. Ambassador Zethkar, Elder Korth said as he entered the chamber, you've returned from the contaminated zones. Do you bring intelligence about human weaknesses we can exploit? Zethkar stood before the assembly of beings who had chosen fear over wonder, looking at faces twisted by years of refusing to accept the evidence of their own senses. I bring a message from the human collective. We don't negotiate with diseases, snarled Fleet Admiral Corvex, who had been promoted to Supreme Military Commander of the Preserved Worlds. We cure them. They know about the purity protocol, Zethkar said bluntly. They know you're planning to use it on the Soul system. Good. Admiral Korvex replied. Let them know that their contamination ends here. Admiral, Zethkar said carefully. Do you understand what you're planning to do? Sol isn't just a star system anymore. It's become a multidimensional anchor point for reality itself. If you disrupt it with temporal reversion technology, then we eliminate the source of the contamination, Korvex interrupted. The humans will finally be properly extinct, and the galaxy can return to normal. Zethkar realized with growing horror that the preserved world leaders had moved beyond rational thought. Their fear had transformed into a fanatical belief system that couldn't be penetrated by logic or evidence. There is one alternative, he said desperately. The humans are offering you a choice. The chamber fell silent. Join them willingly, and they'll help you understand what you could become. Continue to resist, and they'll ensure you have exactly what you've always claimed to want. Perfect, unchanging isolation. But if you try to use the purity protocol, what? Korvex demanded. What will they do? Zethkar met the Admiral's reptilian gaze directly. They'll save you from yourselves, whether you want to be saved or not. 3 days later, the preserved world fleet launched its assault on the Sol system. 147 ships carrying reality-anchoring weapons approached the transformed heart of human space with the intention of erasing 12,000 years of human evolution from existence. They never had the chance to fire. As the fleet approached the outer edge of the Sol system, something impossible happened. The ships didn't encounter defenses or weapons. Instead, they encountered choice. Every being aboard every ship suddenly found themselves standing in a place that existed between heartbeats, between thoughts, between possibilities. They stood in a space that was perfectly calm and perfectly beautiful, where they could see with absolute clarity what their fear had made them become. Sarah Chun stood before them, not as an enemy or a conqueror, but as someone who remembered what they had been before fear consumed them. You came here to destroy us, she said gently. But we can't allow you to destroy yourselves. Around them, the preserved world military found themselves experiencing something they had forgotten was possible: hope. They saw themselves as they could be, not perfect, not enhanced beyond recognition, but simply free to grow and explore and become whatever they chose to become. The choice is still yours, Chen continued. Go back to your preserved worlds and live exactly as you always have, or stay here and discover what you could become if you stopped being afraid. Admiral Korvex, his cybernetic enhancements suddenly, feeling like change rather than improvements, looked around at the impossible beauty surrounding them. And if we choose to fight anyway, then you'll find, Chen said with infinite sadness, that you're only fighting yourselves. The Admiral tried to give the order to fire, but the words wouldn't come. Not because he couldn't speak, but because he suddenly understood, with crystal clarity, exactly what those weapons would destroy. Not just human achievements, but the dreams and possibilities of billions of beings throughout the galaxy who had chosen growth over stagnation. One by one, the weapons powered down, not through sabotage or force, but through choice. The choice of beings who finally understood what they had been about to sacrifice in the name of preserving their fear. When the preserved world fleet returned to Nexus Prime, they carried news that would transform the galaxy forever. The humans had won not through force or conquest, but by offering everyone, even their enemies, the choice to become what they had always dreamed of being. The final entry in Ambassador Zethkar's log read simply, "Today, the galaxy learned that legends are not stories from the past. They are possibilities waiting to be born." And in the space between dimensions, where humans had learned to exist, 12,000 years of patience and love finally bloomed into a future that no one could have imagined, but everyone could choose to embrace. The void no longer trembled with roars of anger or defiance. Instead, it sang with the voices of countless beings who had learned that the only limits on what they could become were the ones they chose to accept. And, in that song, the echo of humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy rang clear and true, the absolute, unshakable conviction that everyone deserves the chance to grow beyond what they think is possible.